Hello, listeners. My name is Nolan Whitworth, and today I'll be giving an online lecture on Augustus and his great rebuilding of Rome. To begin this online lecture on Rome's restoration, I'll begin by giving a brief introduction on who Augustus was. Augustus, born in 63 BC, is also known as Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, was the adopted son of the famed dictator Gaius Julius Caesar. After the assassination of his father in 44 BCE, a young Augustus was thrown into a turbulent world of war, intense politics, and intrigue. Over time, Augustus' auctoritas in Rome would grow as he would gain the loyalty of the legions and the respect of the Senate. By 30 BC, Augustus had managed to defeat all his major political opponents, including the Liberators, or the assassins of Caesar, as well as his former ally, then rival, Mark Antony. In 27 BC, the victorious Augustus restored the outward facade of the Republic by absolving his total command and granting power back to the Senate. This was a calculated move, as he did not want to appear as a monarch, just like his assassinated father. Though the power of the Republican government was restored, Augustus was still the real man in charge, as he would go to hold a myriad of powerful titles, including that of lifetime tenure as tribune, as well as the title of Princeps Senatus, which basically meant he was the top man in the Senate. As the unofficial sovereign of Rome, Augustus would begin a campaign of total restoration in the Eternal City. This would see a revitalization of the city and infrastructure, as well as morals. Now that I've introduced you to the great Augustus, it is now important to highlight the situation Rome was in before Augustus took power. In his own words, when referring to Rome, he stated he had founded and built a brick and left it in marble. This statement is all too true, as pre-Augustan Rome was a complete mess and the city was on the verge of collapse. We do see some lavish projects get built, but many of these, such as the Theatre of Pompey, served no real benefit to the dying Rome, mostly just for theatrics. These great projects were mostly constructed by greedy politicians who sought to increase their personal renown, as well as to gain political favor of the people through a sort of bribery. The streets of Rome were filled with poverty and crime, houses were tightly packed and poorly built, on the verge of structural collapse. This was due to the constant flooding of the Tiber. Overall, Rome was a mess and needed a savior. With peace restored and Augustus in power, he immediately began his building program. Luckily, Augustus had his top general and best friend Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa to help him. Agrippa was a master engineer. His role in rebuilding the city was crucial, and it couldn't be done without him. One of the first major accomplishments of the building program was the restoration of some 82 temples, which is mentioned in Augustus' Res Gestae. Because of the constant war and the overall mismanagement of funds in Rome, many of the great temples of Rome had fallen into ruin. The people of Rome believed that this lack of care for the temples brought many troubles to Rome, as the gods were displeased. Not only did Augustus restore the temples, but he also constructed his own temples, including one dedicated to Mars Altor, the god of revenge, as well as Apollo, a god closely linked to healing. This is something that Rome desperately needed. With the temples restored, the Pax Deorum was finally stable, or the peace of the gods. With the great temples restored, Augustus also put much work into the Forum Romanum. His restoration of the Forum was quite significant, as the Forum had been the heart of Rome since the early monarchical period. The Forum contained great temples, as well as important houses of politics, such as the Curia, or the Senate House, and the law courts, which were housed in the city's two most impressive basilicas, the Basilica Julia and the Basilica Aemilia. Many of the new structures in the Forum would be closely linked to Augustus, such as his own triumphal arch, as well as the temple dedicated to his deified adopted father, Julius Caesar. These works further enhanced the authority of Augustus, as well as his family, as they would bear the names and would be remembered and be spoken by men hundreds of years later. To keep listing Augustus' great projects would be quite tedious, so I'll now touch on the smaller but equally important infrastructure projects that were built during his reign. Augustus was responsible for the construction and repair of Rome's vast road network. These roads stretched through the entire empire and made travel safer and allowed the movement of goods and soldiers to be very quick. To this day, these roads are still used and are a staple of Roman culture. Augustus also paid much attention to Rome's aqueducts as well as her sewers. As mentioned, the flooding of the Tiber caused great structural damage to the houses of Rome. This would no longer be an issue with Augustus. To sustain these public works, Augustus created new offices within Rome. These were responsible for the management of the infrastructure. With that, new jobs were also created, such as firefighters and a night watch. With the building program briefly covered, it's important to understand how all of this relates to the overall message of Augustus' regime. As mentioned, Rome was a divided and broken place prior to his takeover. Degeneracy and crime ran rampant, friends and family were destroyed by constant civil wars, and it seemed that everybody forgot to honor the gods. Augustus changed all this. He came to model himself as a savior and took on the persona of the healer god Apollo, which he built a temple to on the Palatine Hill next to his residence. He wanted to show the people that if they obeyed him, they could return to the old glory days of Rome, the classical Republican days, and restore Rome to her former glory. He wanted to show the people that a new era was coming, and indeed he did usher in a new era. The period during and after his reign would go to be known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. During this over 2 centuries, Rome would see a period of prosperity and expansion at an unprecedented level. Though the man is long dead, the memory of Augustus will never fade, as long as civilized men exist.